Hey, hey, Marisa here with Steve Olsher. Let me know if you can see me and hear me in the chat. And Steve, can you talk?
I can see you and hear you in the chat.
Okay, can you see and hear Steve and me in the chat? Let's go. All right. Murray wants my mic to look good because this is a podcasting episode, so we're making the mic look super visible, so it looks like we're on a podcast, even though we're not on a podcast. All
Looks
right.
good.
Yeah, so Richard and Sandra and Christine says, yes, hi from New Zealand and got you both fantastic. So who else is here and where are you coming in from? Love to just say hi to everyone in here. We've got Selena from Santa Fe, Cece, Christine from Vancouver, Cece's from Saskatchewan, and I can't quite say it like a Canadian, but they got the best accent. Pam from Sacramento, all from Switzerland. Okay. John from San Diego, Paul from Toronto, now it's not quite in the shot anymore, Jason from Quebec City, Douglas from London, Ontario, Canada. That's like 3 cities in one.
Right.
All right. Victor from Mexico, fantastic. Welcome. We had such a great response to this. I wanted to invite you to be a fly on the wall because honestly, I selfishly want Steve to help me turn my kind of lame idea into something that's really good, because I'm thinking if I'm going to talk about something every week for I don't know how long, but I bet I really enjoy talking about it and be excited about it. And I want people to listen because otherwise it's kind of a waste of time. So let me quickly introduce you to Steve. And Cece saying nothing you do is lame, Marisa. Thank you. Well, it starts off lame in my mind. It's just how this idea process works. And then eventually it becomes something glorious and beautiful, but it's not as fast and instantaneous as most people hope for or would expect. It's the idea of going from, I believe that kind of all ideas start off as lame or just okay ideas, maybe good ideas, but it takes a bit of time before it really becomes a great idea. And so I've actually been talking about and entertaining the idea of a podcast for about 3 years now, and I haven't taken action because I haven't felt like I had the right idea. So I want to introduce you quickly to Steve. And Steve is a friend of mine. How long have we known each other? Like 5 years, 6 years?
At least 5 or 6 years for sure.
So Steve is known for 3 things: liquor, booze, basically, podcasts, and partying. So let me explain that. So Steve
Sounds like the making
founder
for a really good podcast, by the way. Like the combination of those things, I think we just hit on something.
Totally. So Steve is actually the founder of liquor.com. And so he knows his way around booze. And he's also knows his way around podcasts because he has 2 podcasts. One is called Reinvention Radio, which I'll be on in like September of this year. I'm going to go down to San Diego. And the really cool thing about Reinvention Radio is he does it in person in like a real radio studio, like old school radio, right?
It is a live show. I am one of those content challenged people. So by having to be at the station every Thursday at noon, I get my content done, and then we repurpose it as a podcast. Yeah.
Very, very cool. And the other thing that's kind of cool is that every time I go to a mastermind or an event and Steve is there, and he's always there kind of lurking, he's the one who's trying to get everyone
I'm a creeper. I'm a creeper now. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, but you're the one who's trying to get people to go out partying till late hours and stuff. And you're always trying to go. Yes. So that's what I know Steve for. But seriously, he actually has some mad props. He's known as the world's foremost reinvention expert. He's famous for helping people and companies become really, really clear on their what, kind of the one thing that they were created to do. So he's got a practical, no-holds-barred approach to life and business that propels his clients towards achieving massive profitability while also cultivating a life of purpose, conviction, and contribution. So he's been an entrepreneur for 25 years. He's the chairman and founder of liquor.com, an online pioneer who launched CompuServe's electronic mall in 1993, New York Times best-selling author of What Is Your What? Discover the One Amazing Thing You Were Born to Do, author of the Business Technology Book of the Year, founder of Internet Profits, the world's leading experts reveal how to profit online, and creator of the New Media Summit. And he's the host of the #1 rated radio show podcast, Reinvention Radio. He's an international keynote speaker and very in demand as a media guest who's appeared on CNN, the Huffington Post, the cover of Founder magazine, and a lot of other places. So it sounds like a couple people have watched your event last month and said it was super good. Very cool.
Awesome.
So here's my challenge. I've been thinking about just how are the different ways that I can both engage my existing tribe and grow a new tribe. And, I've been blogging for about 5 years, and that's great. And I get a lot of engagement on the blog. And also noticing that email rates, for me and for pretty much everyone are starting to go down. So if I'm relying on sending an email to send people to a blog, not everybody is going to see that. So I'm thinking about what are the other places that I can reach my tribe, but also grow my tribe. So I can have more people tuning in, following me, finding out about me, like our products and all of that. And so I've been considering podcast for a while, but it seems like unless you're in the top 10 or one of these really well-known podcasts, that it's hard to really find an audience. And what are your thoughts about that? And like, why should I consider using a podcast? Because it seems like also a pain in the butt. Like you got to record stuff every week and get it out there and do all this work. So is it worth it? What's the ROI?
Well, let me say this, which is first and foremost, you're right in terms of what's going on in the world of what I would call push media, which is obviously traditional broadcast media like radio and television would fall under push media categories. But, for all intents and purposes, so does email marketing and so does social media marketing, right? Because reality is in that land of push, the recipient is not asking for what's there. They're getting it, right? And they can choose to go to a different channel. If they're listening to the radio, they didn't choose that song, they can go to a different channel. Email, they can delete it or open it. And social media, they can see that post or move on to the next, whatever, right? But they're not choosing to get it. And so that whole world of push marketing, I'm not saying it's coming to an end by any stretch, but it certainly is less effective than it has ever been, especially since we're looking so much now at pull marketing as being the wave of the future, where people pull what they want, when they want it, and on their preferred device. And so if we compare and contrast podcasting to, say, email marketing, whereas, I don't know, what do you get? Do you hit double digits on your open rates right now for email marketing? Are you?
Yeah, oftentimes we do, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So once you get, if you've got a smaller list, you're probably still seeing 25%, somewhere in there, which means 75% of the people are still not opening your email. Once you get over 100,000 people, like our list is 120,000 people, whatever it is at this point, we hit double digits, we're doing pretty good, right? Which means 90% of our people aren't opening emails. So compare that to podcasts, where that's a pull media, right? In terms of if somebody says, I'm going to listen to this episode, they're downloading it, they're listening to it. And reality is they're raising their hand to say they want it. So that to me is the equivalent of not only like a 100% open rate, but really like a 100% click-through rate, which is insane, right? So when you talk about what's going on and how do we stay ahead of that curve, I really do encourage you to think about the difference between push marketing and pull marketing. And we can literally just stop right there and have a discussion, we can further that conversation, because podcasting certainly falls under the category of pull, because the consumer is deciding what they want and when they want it and consuming that on their preferred device. So you talk about finding your audience. If somebody finds your podcast and they listen to it, that's your audience.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it like that, but I heard that it's really hard to get someone from listening to a podcast to, say, opting in for your email list or signing up for something, because they're here probably on their phone in the middle of LA traffic or whatever it happens to be, and they're listening and they're engaged, but then getting them to do something outside of listening is actually hard. Is that the case? And by the way, Ryan says, nice LYM pen. Are you using one of the Live Your Message pens?
Baby.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even mean to do a product placement there, but our pens, our merch just gets around, huh?
Baby. So, all right. So just, in terms of how do you be an engaging, there's two sides of the mic, right? Obviously, if you don't want to start your own podcast, you don't have to. You can definitely take advantage of the medium simply by being a guest on shows for now, because this is what you wanted me to talk about with you. We're obviously talking about starting your own show, but just understand you can still take advantage of the medium without starting your own show, because there's definitely a lot of work that's involved. But what you're really talking about is obviously being engaging and learning how to enroll people into your ecosystem. Because if there is a downside right now of the podcasting world, it's that the producers, if you will, the content creators, at least on the big platforms, there are some small platforms coming up where this is changing, but on the big platforms like iTunes or Stitcher or SoundCloud, Spotify even, you don't know who's listening, right? So someone can do that anonymously, which on one hand is great, and that's why the medium is continuing to grow as it's growing, because it is an anonymous medium where you can listen to whatever you want in your headphones and no one's the wiser. But how do you get people out of that mode of being sort of a passive listener into being an active prospect and potentially a raving fan and customer? And reality is that's the operative word, which is bounce, right? I mean, you have to bounce them from that one platform where they're just sort of this anonymous listener into being this active prospect. And so there's obviously tricks of the trade and so on, but it really just starts, in my mind, with the core fundamental question of A, why do you want to create your own podcast? And B, do you have a profit path and an understanding of what the last step is on the path that you want someone to take with you? Because what you really want to be doing as you're talking through this conversation around whatever that subject is you really want to be planting the seed or future pacing, or whatever term it is that you want to use, where their natural response to what you're doing is to further the conversation with you in under a different medium. I don't want to say offline because it's still going to be online somewhere, but basically going from hearing that to actually taking action. And that requires a couple of different steps, but it's absolutely possible.
Totally. So I hear that. And let's, I guess, take it out of the land of the hypothetical and start talking about the podcast I'm thinking about doing. And yep. I see a couple questions coming in that we'll ask. And our help desk sent me all of these. These are questions that people emailed in. So Great. I'll try to get to those as much as possible too at the end of this call. But let's get practical, because I'm a big fan of learning by example. And I know this is a challenge that I've been stuck on for a while. So I've had a bunch of different ideas for podcasts. And I'll tell you the most recent one, and then I'll kind of tell you some of the other ideas that I've had. So, when I'm thinking about a show, I'm like, well, what's going to be something that has enough of a hook to really have people say, okay, you've got to hear the show by Marisa Murgatroyd. It's about this. And then what they say when they say it's about this is so compelling that the other person's like, I got to go check it out. So for example, I had multiple people say, oh, you got to go listen to how I built this. It's going to give you cojones as an entrepreneur, because you hear all the harrowing stories of how people almost lost it all and overcame it and took risks and then built these incredible companies. And so I heard that. I'm like, okay, yeah, I got to hear the inside scoop on all these entrepreneurs' journeys. And I went and I listened to it a few times, and it's been interesting, but I haven't listened to all that many podcasts. And I feel like a lot of people just create podcasts that are kind of just rambling about some topic that interests them, but what's going to keep someone coming back over and over again? Because this isn't a one-time curiosity. You want something that's interesting enough to have people come back over and over and over again. So that's kind of what I want to find. Go ahead.
Yeah. So here's what I would say, and this is going to be the complete opposite of probably what anyone else will tell you, which is when you create a show, the only reason to create a show now, and you addressed this earlier, which is how do you break into that ascending spiral of popularity, right? Which is, the popular shows are shown, so new people who come into that world find those shows, they listen to those shows, they download those shows, that increases their popularity, so they stay in the rankings and they continue to ascend upwards. And more new people come in, they find these shows, they listen to these shows. So in other words, breaking that pattern of getting into that ascending spiral that the popular shows are in is really, really hard. So the point is, when you think about creating a show, don't think about creating a show that will compete with, the Tim Ferrisses or Gary Vaynerchuk's of the world, right? That's going to be something that is an effort and futility. You're not going to catch up. And I will tell you that there are a number of popular shows that if they were to launch those same shows today, they wouldn't have squat for an audience. But they started early enough that they have that ascending spiral working for them. So those who start a show today, I actually tell them something completely different than I would have told them even just a year or two ago. And what I tell folks today is that when you start and create a show, and this holds true for you, of course, Marisa, is you want to create a show where it's as if you're doing this with the intention of absolutely no one listening. So create a show as if no one is listening. And I know that sounds like the complete opposite and antithesis of what you're probably thinking in your mind, because you want lots and lots of people to listen to it. But if you go in and you create a show based on what it is that you think is going to work and based on what it is that you think the public needs or wants, it is really going to be an effort and futility, and it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So create a show where it is literally something that you are creating because you have fire around it, because it is something that you can talk about till you're blue in the face, because it is something that comes as naturally to you as breathing, and put out these episodes and put out this content as if no one is listening. And I promise you the opposite is going to happen.
Well, believe me, that's why I haven't done it yet, because I wasn't excited about an idea, but I think I have an idea that I'm excited about, And the other thing that I'm thinking about is I want to, multi-purpose this. So it's not just a podcast going out on the iTunes store, but it's something that we're streaming on Facebook Live, broadcasting, and I've created a broadcast network of about 120 of my top students and things who are ready to broadcast the content once I come out with it. But I haven't come out with it because there wasn't something that I was excited about yet. And I just can't talk about things that I'm not excited about. It's just the way that I'm biologically built, so that's where I'm at. But just quickly, I want to get to my idea, but if I create something, and I'm thinking about the difference between creating an audio or video, because I want to stream on Facebook Live, then I'm thinking video, but then I get into the whole production values and it becomes a much bigger affair than just going in audio. But then if I have a video, I can repurpose, I can do all kinds of things with video and have other purposes and all of that. But what are your thoughts on audio or video?
Well, let me say this, that it really depends on the format of the show, because there's what I've identified are 5 core formats for a show. One being sort of a soapbox type show, where it's just Marisa talking about a subject, whatever it is, it's the, Marisa's Minute, whatever it is, just you talking about something. That's what it is, right? That's the show. It's a soapbox. Maybe. I mean, I will say this, that short form content is absolutely where things are moving. And the average interview on a podcast is about 62 minutes. We do interview shows. Interview style is the second style of show. And I can tell you that just seeing what's going on with the metrics, that the short form shows that you wouldn't get bored of, where you just you come out with a thought and you do this, that, then that could work really, really well for you as a short form show. But if you decide to go with the second route in terms of maybe doing an interview show, those obviously are going to be a little bit longer. You do a third type of show, which could be like a morning zoo type show, which is what we do with Reinvention Radio, where we've got a couple of hosts and we round robin it that way. And then you've got the serial type show, which is episodic. And then you've got a Q&A show where people send in questions and you answer those questions, right? So those are the 5 core types. I will say this, that certain formats lend themselves better to video than others, right? So do you have a sense of which you would be leaning towards in terms of which format?
I think it would actually be a hybrid show. So it would be, I'm thinking of something because I'm easily bored, that if I just did one format, I would want to shoot myself after a while. So I'm thinking of something that would rotate between essentially almost all of the formats. And I'll give you an idea, but it's one core theme in just a moment. But I love this. Enrique says, create a show assuming nobody is listening is like dancing like nobody is watching.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, here's what I was thinking. And when I'm really thinking about what could I talk about, like you said, that I have fire around that I'm not going to get bored of. And I thought about certain things, like I went through different ideas, like should I talk about the experientification of business because we have this experience product masterclass, but then I'm like, what I do is bigger than that. That's a piece of it. But if it's a piece of its bigger trend. Then I thought about talking about things related to, I know you from the internet and being internet famous, and that's a piece of it, but there's a much bigger why behind it. So that in and of itself wasn't interesting enough for me. And then sometimes people call me the queen of disruption because I like to have ideas that disrupt the standard industry and way of doing business, not for the sake of disruption, but just to get noticed by other people. Then I thought about something being unmistakably you, because, I talk about that a lot, that the only way to stand out from the noise of 2 billion websites is to be, unmistakably you, to be more you. And I was like, yeah, it's a little self-serving. So then I was starting to think about, well, it really is about ideas. And what are the ideas that get noticed today? Because when you have the right idea, it can make you internet famous. It's going to be unmistakably you. It can exponentiify your business. It does all these other things. So right now, what I'm thinking about is a podcast called Super Sticky, Ideas and Products That Change the World. So it's the idea of how do you create an idea that's so freaking sticky that it catches on like a contagion, almost a virus, because it's so interesting what you're saying that people are listening. It's not the same old, because one of the biggest challenges in marketing today is that the market sophistication is so high. There's so many people talking about the same things that it creates a phenomenon known as mental opt-out, which is people instantaneously saying, been there, done that, I've heard it, I'm not that interested, because what new do you have to contribute? So that idea of having a super sticky idea kind of comes before everything else, in the sense that if you don't have a cool idea, like every single one of us, we're in the idea business. We're not in the product business, we're not in the service business anymore. We're not always even the problem solving business. That's all part of it. But ultimately, if the idea of our product or service, the problem that we solve, isn't catching on to people, then everything else is going to tumble down. So my idea for a podcast, and I'm curious what people on the line think, is basically a super sticky idea. So it might be called Super Sticky, Ideas and Products That Change the World. And it's a combination of, say, sometimes I will be interviewing people who've had a super sticky idea that's caught on, like the bird scooters that are just everywhere. That's a super sticky idea that did happen to disrupt a market. There might be other times where I give a super sticky intervention, where someone has a very boring idea that is not getting noticed whatsoever, and they come on the show, and basically I, grill them until we get to something super sticky. I may even try to have a sticky panel where I might have people who've got big opinions on ideas and have them have almost like the Olympics, and they're holding up, like the figure skating, holding up the 10 or the 9 or whatever, and there's a sticky panel with the sticky scale, so they get to see how sticky they are. And there are other times where I might do a deconstructed case study or review of, if I can't get the founder of Bird, where I just talk about Bird and why I think it's so sticky as it is, and why it's become so effective, and why it's beat out all kinds of other things. And I was even imagining, well, what would be the opening of this? I could see, someone blowing a giant gum bubble, and I could see honey being squeezed into a cup of tea. I could see Cece here saying Post-it notes being stuck, or glue, all of these different things that are sticky parts of our lives. But I was just thinking that that's something that I could talk about for a long time, because for me, it's all about the power of the idea. And without that, especially in today's market, you're going to be lost. So, I mean, what do you think of that, super sticky?
So I'll say let me just say two things here. First and foremost, because you already have a platform, you're going to be in a little bit of a different boat than someone who doesn't have the benefit of an existing platform. So you have a mailing list, you have a social media following, you have loyal, customers, right? You have your network. So in your case, you could, if you're married to that name, not Murray, but if you're married to that name, right? Not right. But I will say this, because you have a platform, you have more leeway, you have more flexibility than others who are trying to, really start from scratch, right? So in your case, because you could tell the story around it, and you have access to people who have interesting ideas and interesting stories and so on, you could do this. You could create a show called Super Sticky. If you look at the podcast art, for most podcasts, I think it's probably going to have to be cut down a little bit in terms of the subtitle, but Super Sticky in and of itself, you could get away with that, because again, you could build an audience that would grow organically from that. Anyone else who doesn't have that, please.
Okay, so would it be better if I called it super sticky ideas than just super sticky because it gives a little bit more sense of what it actually is?
Well, I think about it from this standpoint, all right? So we talked about the ascending spiral and the shows that it will continue down the path of the ascending spiral. When you look at breaking into this world of finding an audience, how do you get discovered, right? So what we're really talking about is discoverability and search and Alexa and Google Home and all of these, devices where all of this new media is being broadcast from. And so the question is, and this is more of a question for the audience here today, as you guys are thinking potentially about doing a show, if you were looking for a show around what Marisa is talking about, would you throw in that term? Would you say that? Would you be searching for that? And the answer is probably not.
Yeah, but is all the search juice in the name or is it also in the description?
It's a combination of the two. I mean, if we're just simply, like if you're going to Alexa right now, and you're saying, Alexa, play me a business podcast. One of the reasons why we named our next show the Best Business Podcast is because of discoverability, right? And because of the way that people search. And reality is people are going to be looking for, hey, what's one of the best business podcasts out there, right? Like these sort of search terms. And so, again, this is something to think about if you don't have an existing platform. This is something to think about when your reach is minimal, is what are people actually searching for, and building a show around that. But there's a bigger question here, which really just boils down to, what is your profit path? Why are you doing the show? What are you hoping that people will do when they hear the show? You asked the question earlier of, I'm sitting here in LA traffic, I'm listening to the show. How do I take action? What do I do? I mean, those are the two fundamental questions you have to answer first. Which is what is the core profit path and what action do you actually want people to take? Because this could light you up and this could just be something you do just because it's fun to sit down with the CEO of Bird or whatever it might be. I mean, this just literally could be something you do because it's fun. And there is, and the why behind it. For that. Yeah. Well,
so I don't have time to do stuff just because it's fun. But here's a couple of notes from the tribe. Vanessa says, Richard says, love it. Marisa says, you're the queen of sticky. This is all great. Vanessa says, fun, but how to make your idea super sticky versus just hearing about super sticky ideas, because it could be a bright, shiny object playground or attract startups. But yeah, exactly. It's like you would learn from the examples for sure. It's not just about this is a cool sticky idea, but it's like, what can you take away from it for sure? Cece says, what if the podcast was to do the grilling to bring people from stuck to sticky? Stuck to sticky is cute, but I think if it were just grilling, that it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be enough because you'd want to hear something else.
So let me just say this. So you probably recognize this person, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then for those who are just listening on the audio, I've got Marisa's Mastery pamphlet right here, right? So I mean, to me, that's probably the last step on the path that you want someone to take with you, right? Or is there another?
That's the end of the customer journey. As you know, I believe in the customer journey. So the beginning of the customer journey, to go back to the profit path, and I'm just going to go through these last little names here first. Yeah. Aubrey says, what's the benefit of the listener specifically in the name? I don't necessarily believe that all names have to have benefits. I think names can be evocative. I mean, I think that's why a subtitle needs to have a benefit if it's not in the name, or if it's in the name, then you can be more expressive in the benefit. But all of like Seth Godin's book or Purple Cow or something, it's something that creates intrigue, and then you get into it. So Dennis says, ideas are everywhere. People need to understand execution. How can you blend both? It's interesting, though. I think a lot of people just start to jump into action, and if the idea is not strong, it's like the difference between creating a Hollywood video film on a bad script versus a beautiful script. You could do all the execution and throw $100 million at a bad script, and you still would not have a good film. So obviously, I don't think you can do everything with a particular idea. And also when it comes to execution, that's where a lot of our products come in. So for me, the goal of the podcast is it's a top of the funnel offer that creates curiosity and interest, which would then be like, okay, I want to learn how to do this for myself. That's where the, our products and stuff would come in. So let's see. I see Ryan says super sticky sounds a little raunchy, which could be used to your benefit because people would be like, what is this about? But could be deterred by what your content actually is. However, the idea is good, but needs a better title to reflect your idea. So, but I also don't want one of those boring titles like Best Business Podcast. I'm sorry, but I think that's lame. And it's like a pure search engine play. And for instance, you can lead the whole exact match EMD, exact match domain name, a URL that has your exact keyword in it. And it used to be really common. But there's a difference between a brand and a search engine tactic. So for me, a brand is something that creates meaning over time. Yep. And that's going to be where a lot of the value gets built, but it's not necessarily like the instantaneous recognition. But like you said, if you're just starting out, then it might be different. Ideas that stick, that's nice too. She just wrote idea stick. I changed it to ideas that stick. But I do want to make it clear that it's business. You could go into super sticky businesses too, as well.
And look, obviously there could be some brand confusion around that because there's a fairly popular book called Made to Stick, I think, which actually has a post-it note there on the cover and on it. But, reality is for me, again, if we just look at the creation of the show from the standpoint of, why it is that you're doing the show, there's a couple of different ways to look at this. I mean, one way to look at this, and this is something that a lot of people don't think about, is they actually use it as a tool with which to bring people into their ecosystem from a guest standpoint. Because a lot of people don't look at their guests as potential clients. And so if the last step on your path, is the Blue Sky Mastery and you want to get more people into that program, you could actually look at it from the standpoint of bringing in guests who are ideal candidates for that program, right? So again, it's the why behind it, like the Best Business Podcast. Part of the reason why we do it and the tag on it, it's all about starting, scaling, and exiting. So start, scale, exit. But the parameters of who we have on the show, we only have people on the show who have either exited for more than $10 million or are currently running a $10 million plus business. So why do we do it that way? We do it that way because those guests that we have on the show are ideal candidates for our mastermind of really high level people at $100,000 a year, right? Yeah. So those people are the ideal candidates to be in that mastermind, right? So it's something to think about as you go into this, which is, am I looking at it from the standpoint of monetizing the audience, or am I looking at it from the standpoint of just credibility and authority, or, am I looking at it from the standpoint of monetizing the guests, right?
I want all of it. All of it.
Right, so, which is tough to do.
Yeah, well, I guess what I'm thinking about is, for example, we have a branding agency and we work with people who are primarily kind of 7, 8, and some 9-figure entrepreneurs. So I think that our guests potentially could be candidates for our branding agency because a lot of the people that we serve are thought leaders and people who have innovative ideas and products that are changing the world. So in a way, those guests, which I never even thought of, could be a great candidates for our branding agency. Now, in terms of the audience, I think the audience, because we have a lot of people in our audience who are emerging entrepreneurs who maybe are thinking of getting started or have already gotten started and not where they want to be. So I'm wondering if maybe for that audience, like they're thinking, well, I want an idea or I want a business that's sticky like this, like ultimately. And then, we're building a new evergreen funnel around our Start With You product, which is how to build the business you're meant to build. And really, which is kind of like about, in some ways, a business that's so authentically aligned with you would naturally be sticky because you're the only you in the world. So if it's the US version of you, that could get people in. We've got our Experience Product Masterclass, but we only offer that once a year. But still, that's really about sticky products because experience products are absolutely sticky. They're inherently sticky. They're getting people hooked. Those are products that get people hooked. And then, of course, we have our mentorship programs, Blue Sky Mentorship and Next Level Mentorship. And I see many of my mentorship students here listening. Yeah. And those right now, we only do one enrollment cycle per year. But in the future, we want to create something where people could enter more than once per year. So potentially that would be really how do you get an idea off the ground and actually do the execution, turn it into form. So we have a lot of places for people to ultimately go when they enter our ecosystem. So I would love to be driving leads into the business, and maybe we, have an opt-in gift that kind of goes into one of these start with you or whatever it happens to be, so we get people into our world.
Yeah. And honestly, the word that comes to mind, and you said this earlier, but you said it in a little bit of a different way. And, ultimately, I think super sticky can be really good, your $1 million idea, something like that. But the more I hear you talk here, the more I really think it boils down to one particular word, which is just a variation of a word you've already used. The idea of a show that's called Unmistakable could be pretty cool. It's pretty fun, because then you could talk about the people and the businesses and so on that do X, Y, Z, right? So just, a simple one word something. And that seems to be, because that's who you are. You create unmistakable brands, you create unmistakable products, programs, and services, you create unmistakable people, right? So I don't know, that's the word that came to mind as I've been listening to you talk more and more here.
It's another way of saying that one does go in a little bit better to the, it goes a little bit better into start with you. And I know that one of the ideas that I had was unmistakable you as one of the ideas earlier on. So I played with, like I said, disrupt this, unmistakable you, super sticky, not your grandma's podcast. It's just like all these different ideas, right? But that's a good one too. So.
Because it feeds really well into, because again, when you design your profit path and the way that you've designed it here, so here's going to be the natural outcome. People are going to hear the show, and the natural conversation that's going to be going on in their head is, how do I create my own unmistakable idea? How do I create my own irreplaceable brand? How do I tap into what makes me unique and puts fire in my soul, right? So these are all the questions that they're going to be having. And then if you say, here is the resource that helps you figure out those answers, that's how you bounce them from being passive listeners into being active prospects and customers.
I like it. I think it matches the start with you brand at the top of our funnel a little bit better. And it
gives you flexibility too. Right. Yeah. If it's just, because then unmistakable, like you could talk to just someone who's doing amazing, interesting things, and you can talk to small business owners, and you can talk to enterprise level companies. Right. So I think it gives you a lot of flexibility. Not that super sticky doesn't, but I just think, again, the more I hear you talk about what your profit path is, this feeds pretty well into that. And the tagline, the subtitle, whatever, I think it gives you flexibility around that as well.
I like it. It's interesting. Richard writes here, Aubrey says, nice, Steve. Richard says, unmistakable is about me. Sticky is determined by customers. And Anya says, unforgettable, and you have a built-in theme song.
Right. Yeah. So lots of good ideas. Obviously, there's not a right or wrong answer to any of this. But at the end of the day, I do believe that in just knowing how busy you are and knowing how your goal is, of course, to always serve at the highest level possible. This to me seems like a really good combination of both of those initiatives.
Cool. So I see Dennis writes unmistakable as a winner. So I'm curious, please write in the chat, unmistakable or super sticky. I'd love to see the votes here and see what y'all like. And because you're my audience, you're my tribe. So what you respond to better, and and then we'll see. I'd love to just get a sense, and if you can all invite you all to vote, it would just help me a lot to know where you stand. And
you can actually do a poll. I think you can do a poll on GTW on GoToWebinar here.
Well, that's beyond my GoToWebinar skills.
All right. Yeah.
I could try to find it out.
No worries. No worries. So, again, it's the title, to be honest, is almost irrelevant when you come right down to it. Because the only reason to have a title that you feel is like so much better, like if it came back 50-50, the title in and of itself, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's really what you do with the show and how you leverage the power of the medium. That's what it boils down to. And so because neither of those are going to be search terms, people are not going to be searching for a show called Super Sticky. They're not going to be searching for a show called Unmistakable. I mean, obviously, I'd love to hear, the feedback. But again, this still becomes a show that you're creating because you have fire around it and because you can see the vision for what's possible for the people who tune in. And so just, it's a little bit of apples and oranges, if you will.
Totally. So I see that there's a lot of notes coming in. There's definitely votes for both. It looks like Unmistakable so far has a little bit more, but there's still plenty of votes for Super Sticky as well. Yeah, keep the votes coming in. I really appreciate them. So obviously this is the 20 or 30 votes that we have so far is not enough of a pool for me to make a definitive conclusion. So please keep the voting coming in, please. And I'm a brander, so names do actually matter to me. So, and I think as people talk about it, it becomes really important. And I want to create something that people talk about, which is exactly the idea of being unmistakable, unforgettable, super sticky, whatever you want to call it. So keep for sure. So keep the votes coming in, please. I really, really appreciate it. So let's talk about call to actions, right? So I was on, Entrepreneur on Fire a couple months ago, and that's considered probably one of the top or the top business podcast. What is it exactly? Is it?
Out of all due respect for Johnny Lee Dumas, I will refrain from answering that question. It is a business podcast.
In terms of the actual ratings, it's high, isn't it?
Again, ascending spiral, right? And we talked about that is a jar right there. Good Lord. I'm
efficient. I don't have to go and fill it up like every 10 minutes.
Every day. Like that's a 2-dayer right there.
No, I drink like 4 or 5 of these a day. Seriously, I guzzle.
That is
I'm
impressive.
I'm not Camel, I talk I talk a lot. So.
Right. So in answer to your question, when we talked earlier about the ascending spiral, I will say that show is a beneficiary of timing, and the timing was right for the show. So talk more about the experience in terms of what happened for you.
Right. Cool. Yeah. So what happened for me is I went on the show and we had an opt-in gift, and it was I talked about experience products, and the opt-in gift was to download all 10 core experiences. And we had 77 opt-ins, which is not super great for one show. But then one of them turned into a $32,000 client within a week. So
Can I share that as a case study?
Well, yes.
Can I share that? That's great. I mean, I'm in the middle of a launch right now. I'd love to share that as a case study.
No worries. Absolutely. So one of them, ended up clicking through to my website. I had a little sticky thing at the bottom of my site, and basically she clicked through. She saw our mastery program was open. It's now sold out for the next 10 months, and she signed up. So Sweet. Which is great, and that's a $32,000 program, and that was pretty good. So I guess you could say I only had 77 opt-ins, but one of them became a $32,000 client.
And look, reality is, can that happen? Absolutely. Because again, it goes back to when you're thinking about creating a show. Look, that Entrepreneur on Fire is kind of a broad-based business program, right? I mean, it covers a lot of ground, and they have lots of different types of people on. What I will say is that if you're thinking about starting a show, and again, Marisa, it's a little bit different for you because you have the platform, but for everyone else, the rest of us mere mortals who do not have such a Marisa platform, the idea is, I think that you really do have to think about tapping into a specific niche. The fact of the matter that you had that level of exposure on a show that has, decent reach for sure, and had 72 opt-ins, it speaks to the power of niche. And the reason why the podcasting community and the podcasting medium will continue to grow is because it will continue to niche. And so what I invite you to think about here is, how do you get a show where 100% of the people who listen to that show are potential candidates for your products, your programs, and your services? So as an example, I had a private client who had a show called Sex, Money, Food. And, really, cute girl, had just looked the part, whatever, and a very general show. And she was doing okay with it. but she wasn't getting to the numbers of where she wanted to get to. And we sat down, we started talking about, what we can do for her show. And she had shared with me a story of how she had recently given a speech, and the outpouring of love after the speech was unlike anything that she had ever experienced before. And I was like, well, that's amazing. What did you talk about? And she shared the story of how she had contracted genital herpes when she was in college. And she shared that story from the stage, and it was the first time she had ever publicly talked about it. And I said to her, look, I don't know if you're going to be comfortable doing this or not, but I think you're sitting on a 7-figure opportunity there if you're willing to talk about this and kind of be the spokesperson for it, because there really isn't anyone talking about it, even though there's millions of people who have it, right? And so anyway, the point that I'm getting at is she ended up creating a show called Life with Herpes. And if you think about it from this standpoint, which is the people who listen to that show and who download that show, right? So who actively seek out that show, actively download and listen to it, you got to think either A, they have it, B, they know or love someone who does, or C, they work in that industry. So you talk about just like a 100% optimized audience, right? I mean, it's like the people who listen to that show are absolutely ideal candidates for the products, programs, and services that she creates. So again, I just want you to think about it from that standpoint, which is you could be on the biggest shows in the world, but it doesn't mean that size is what's most important here. I always talk about relevance over reach. And so if you're going to be a guest on a show, it's much better for you to be on a show that has a higher degree of relevance than a higher degree of reach. Because this is a perfect example. I mean, yes, it turned into a $32,000 client, but without that one listener, 71 opt-ins is what it would have been. Was that worth an hour of your time?
Probably not. Yeah. So interestingly, one of the questions that Kristen asked here is, how do you know if you have a topic large enough to sustain a podcast, which is kind of what you're saying about relevance versus reach, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so with very rare exception, I don't think that you could ever go too niche in terms of the show that you create. I guess it's possible, but I have yet to come across a show that couldn't get to at least 100 downloads an episode. And here's how I would ask you to think about it, which is if you could speak on stage in front of 100 ideal prospects who are like your most ideal candidates for your products, programs, and services, would you take that speaking gig? And unequivocally, every time I ask the question, every hand goes up in a room. And the answer is always yes, of course, because the likelihood of converting them from being, these passive prospects, passive listeners into active customers, it's very, very high. And so I think, look, it's possible, but I'd be hard pressed to find a show that would be too niche to find an audience.
Very interesting. So talk more, because like you said, you can be, it's not in front of the mic, behind the mic, that's the camera. You can be on either sides of the mic. There you go. That's what you said.
Yeah. Yes.
So you can either start your own show, which is kind of a pain in the butt, but you can do it, or you could kind of leverage other people's shows. And I just dropped in a resource here because you have this awesome guide of podcasters and all these like 600 or so podcasts that you can actually try to guest to. So once you identify them, you can kind of reach out and try to get on the show as a guest. But how do you even go about that? How do you pick the right shows? How do you convince them to feature little old you on that show? How does that work?
Yeah. So, well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, what you're talking about is the ultimate directory of podcasters.
And it's here. I just dropped it in the chat. So if you wanna grab that, it's just right there in the chat. Mm-hmm.
Sweet. And it's 670 of the world's top podcasters. And we give you their photo and their show description, their show URL, even their email address. So we've done all of the work for you. And those are going to be the shows that are at the top of their respective categories. But what I will say is that if you want to get booked on shows, I mean, the first thing that you really need to have clarity on is your topic of influence. And that's the 1, 2, 3, or 4 word description that really encapsulates who you are and what you do and allows you to use that basically as a search term. that you can plug into Google or you can plug into Stitcher or SoundCloud or iTunes, etc. And that will then give you the shows. So if you plug that in, your topic of influence, that will then give you a list of shows that are already talking about your topic of influence. And that's really where you want to start. I mean, the podcast in the directory, those obviously would be great shows to appear on. But what I can tell you is that we spend the first 4 pages of the directory telling you not to reach out and contact any of these people, because the podcasting community, I mean, it's pretty small. And if you're just reaching out cold to people, they're going to see that as spam, right? And so you got to do your homework, you got to do your research, but more importantly, you really got to cut your teeth on smaller shows. And you got to learn how to talk in sound bites. You got to learn how to be an engaging and an enrolling guest. You have to learn what to do with the visibility that you're inevitably going to create, because you will create visibility no matter what size of the show is that you're on. So I would highly suggest starting with your topic of influence, again, articulating in 1, 2, 3, or 4 words who you are and what you do and really what you stand for. So Steve, what's your topic of influence? Mine is reinvention. So I am known as America's reinvention expert. So it would just boil down to reinvention. So that's my moniker. So if I took the word reinvention and I popped it into the search box on iTunes for podcasts, I'm going to see all the shows that are talking about reinvention in one form or another. And the next step, of course, would be to listen to some of those shows, right? Because some of those shows, remember we talked about the different formats at the top of the hour here, not all of those shows are interview shows. If you're pitching a show to be on and they don't even do interviews, kind of makes you look dumb, yep. And that's one of those ways that you can burn those bridges. But listen to the shows, decide if you actually like the host. I mean, Reinvention Radio, we can get a little caustic. I mean, we have fun, but my style may not be for you. You may find that, I'm just not your cup of tea. So why would you pitch me if you don't like my personality, right? So just some things to think about. But yeah, start with the topic of influence, use the search box, find the shows that are already talking about your TOI and listen to them. And then, if the time is right, pitch them.
Cool. And so you say you do decide to create your own podcast. Now, how do you even go about like marketing and launching that?
Well, that fortunately, we do have a whole program on that called Launch Your Podcast, which is separate from the profiting from podcast stuff, but it's included with that, which takes people through that exact process. And I wish, Marisa, it was just a simple, hey, just do this and then do that, right? But you got to look at it in the same way that you would look at launching any brand. I mean, when you launch a podcast, you're really launching a brand, because there are millions and millions and millions of people who listen to podcasts on a monthly basis. As a matter of fact, 26% of the population 14 and over now listens to podcasts on a monthly basis. I mean, that's up from 17% just 2 years ago. So more and more people are listening to these shows. So if you decide to get in the game, which I wholeheartedly encourage you to do, it really does start with understanding what your profit path is. And I don't want to keep, belaboring this point and beating this horse here. But to me, if you're going to put in the time, energy, effort, and resources into starting your own show, just be really clear in terms of what the outcome is that you want for people and what you expect to happen when people listen to the show. Once you get that down, the tech side, I mean, there's plenty of companies. As a matter of fact, with our program, we actually build the podcast channel for you. It's part of what we do. So we take care of all the tech, but there obviously are steps that are involved in launching a show, and it's going to take me a few more minutes than just I think what we have left here. And I know you've got a bunch of questions you wanted to get to also.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of a couple of them. Pam says, what the super niche? How do you market to the audience? And Brian says he's looking for
get as many people involved as possible and spreading the word about what it is that you're doing. Take out ads on Facebook, advertise if you can on other podcasts. Get your guests to share. This is one of the reasons why we encourage you to think about at least incorporating interviews into your podcast launch process and into your podcast. Now, is because oftentimes they will have platforms that rival or are larger than yours. And if you have a good show and you ask them and encourage them to share that with their people, at the very least, share it on social. That's something most guests are more than happy to do. But reality is you've got to talk about it till you're blue in the face. If you're not posting about your podcast somewhere every single day, well, then you're not really marketing it. You're just kind of doing, I guess what we might call hope marketing. You're putting it out there and you're hoping people will listen to it. You got to be active. You got to be really proactive about promoting it. And there's lots of different tools that you can use to do that. But I think at the end of the day here, most people who launch shows just kind of have that if I build it, they will come mentality. And it just doesn't happen that way. Totally.
So Elaine's wanting to know, will podcasts benefit e-commerce and selling physical products too?
If you create a relevant show, it can, right? So like, for instance, if like Orvis. So think about Orvis. So Orvis is, the outdoor company, right? And they have an incredibly popular show where mostly they talk about fly fishing. And I don't know what in the world they do on that show because I'm not a fly fisherman, but I can't imagine how exciting it would be to be like, okay, ready, cast. All right, bring it back in. Like, I don't know what they would talk about on that show. I mean, I have no clue, but I will tell you this, that if they talk about products, so they use it from an e-commerce standpoint, and they talk about, think about the people that are listening to the podcast, right? I mean, these are people who have raised their hand to say, I am an outdoors person, I love fly fishing, all of these criteria. So they're already raising their hand. So if Orvis turns around and says, hey, we've got a special for our podcast listeners only who use, the promo code podcast when you go to orvis.com, you can get 5 lures for free when you buy this pole. I don't know. I mean, right? The answer is absolutely. Because again, if the show is focused on what it is that you sell, either directly or subtly or indirectly, but has a focus on what it is that you sell, you can move people absolutely to buy those products for sure.
Totally. So just a couple more questions here because we only have about 3 minutes left. So I'm curious. First one, someone's asking if they have I've got some crazy shadows here. All right, that's from the other window too. So I'm going to try to move over here. And if they have an accent, a foreign accent, is it a good idea for them to do a podcast?
Well, A, I would never let that deter you from doing a show. But B, if you have an accent, it means you probably speak another language fluently. And I would say if you're not doing 2 shows, one in English and one in whatever that native language is for you, you're missing a huge opportunity.
Totally. So there's a lot of other questions here that I'm not going to get to, but I think many of them we kind of covered it through our main conversation here. But this is a great one to end on from Jason, which is, what's something that you wish you would have known when you started with podcasts?
So what I wish I would have known when I started with podcasts is that there's a long tail to it. And you have to look at this from the standpoint of the odds are really good that you're not going to see the numbers that you want out of the gate. You're probably not going to see them for the first 3 months, 6 months, or a year. And there is an actual term called pod fade, where 90% of those who start shows stop after 9 episodes because they don't get the results that they want. So what I wish that I had known when I had started was that this is a long tail game. And fortunately, I've stayed in the game, but I could have been kinder to myself during the early stages on that because, unless you've got a database of 10 million people and you can blast it out, 100 times a month, you're going to be hard pressed to get to the numbers that really move the needle for you.
Totally. I hear you on that. So the idea is if you do decide to go in and start a podcast, to stick with it and not expect that within 3 months, even within 6 months, that you're going to have this flood of new traffic and visitors to your website or interest in your products, that it may take quite a bit longer to ramp up. But how do you know when to stick with it or be like, abandon ship, this is not happening whatsoever?
Right. And that's it, right? I mean, that's exactly why we talked about if you do a podcast, if you create your own, broadcast as if no one's listening and do it because you find immense joy in doing it. And it allows you to connect. I mean, there's a million reasons to do a podcast, not the least of which is being able to connect with amazing people. Right. Yeah. And so just having a platform to be able to invite someone and, extend that invitation to come and join you on a show. I can't even begin to tell you how powerful that is.
Totally, and to focus on relevancy more than reach. So yeah, and if I know I have this link here, liveyourmessage.com/Steve. So Steve put together this pretty awesome resource of 670 something, an ultimate guide basically of podcasters who have shows that you could reach out to and potentially try to get onto their podcast and get started, like you said, with smaller shows that are in your topic, and then go to bigger shows and just start expanding your reach through other people's podcasts, whether you want to create your own podcast or profit from other people's podcasts, that you can kind of do either. So just go to liveyourmessage.com/Steve, and you can grab that resource. And anything else you want to share, Steve?
I will say this, which is there are literally thousands of shows, tens of thousands of shows, and we are all looking for guests just like you. And reality is you don't have to be famous to get booked. We actually prefer having folks on our shows that people haven't heard of. As a matter of fact, we take great pride in bringing new stories to our audience, stories of people that they've never heard of before. And reality is, you know Tim Ferriss, you know Gary, you know Seth, you know Ariana, like we know what they stand for. We know who they are. We don't need to hear from those folks anymore, right? I mean, it's like, okay, you had your 15 days of fame, like let it go, right? But we don't know your story, and we haven't heard from you. So don't take yourself out of the game before you even get started. Believe me, there are thousands of shows who are all looking for guests exactly like you right now.
Very, very cool. Well, I'm really glad that I had a chance to talk through my ideas with you, and I really appreciate everyone who voted for what you thought about my idea. And I've got a lot to think about, because I know this is a big step, and I'm not going to just start doing it willy-nilly, because I really want it to be something that I am going to be proud of, and that is going to be exciting for all of you as well. So thank you so much for your advice and feedback on my idea, and also just some of my concerns and reservations about podcasts, really answering them and showing me a potential path forward and what to do with some of these thoughts that I've been noodling on for a bit. So thank you all for coming out. Go out there, live your message, and go to liveyourmessage.com/Steve if you want to get his ultimate directory of podcasters. I think it's not going to be up forever, so you would probably want to go grab it today if you're interested in that.
Yep, sounds good. Yeah, just we're only going to have it up for, I don't know, I got to check the calendar. I don't even know what date it is. I've been running around on this launch here, which I'm sure you can appreciate. But yeah, it's after that it'll sell for $297, so you might as well grab it for free now.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for coming out. And it was really fun. Pam says, so enlightening. Thanks for sharing. Melissa says, thank you. Great message. And lots of other thank yous coming in. You're welcome. Thanks for spending the hour with us. This was fun. And my whole thing is, if I've got an idea, I might as well share it publicly, because I'm much more likely to do something about it if I share it publicly than if I
declared it.
Yes, I shared it. Oh no, now that means I got to do something. No, that's a good thing. All right, well, thanks. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Marisa. Bye.
Thank you.